All right, I have come to cheer y'all up about the state of politics in this great nation. And I know you are in need of cheer. I know you think that it is looking dark and gloomy. Well, one reason to be a good cheer, cheer up. It could always be worse. You could be living in Texas. Our situation over there is that we're really kind of proud and excited, those of us who are Texas traditionalists. The House Speaker is under grand jury investigation. And not that we wish him ill in any way, but it would be such a great renewal of a fine tradition. We've had 5 of our last 7 have been indicted for one thing or another, and we kind of hate to let that one lapse. Actually, there was a guy in there who was not indicted. He was shot to death by his wife. Although she was indicted, she was not convicted. Because in Texas, we recognize public service when we see it. Now, I know that Louisiana is proud of its own charmingly eccentric political tradition. Let me explain the relationship between our 2 states. One time, y'all elected an unusually loony governor, even by your standards. That was Earl Long. And he finally got so crazy that his own family had him shipped off to a nut house in Galveston, Texas. We kept him for 6 weeks and sent him back because he looked like a perfectly normal governor to us. One of your more recent governors, Edwin Edwards, has also been sent to Texas to enjoy institutional care. Our governor is a guy named Goodhair Perry. That man has a head of hair every Texan can be proud of, regardless of party. I'll tell you how it goes with Governor Goodhair. He needed to appoint a new member of the State Public Utilities Commission a few years ago. And as they learned out in California, that can be a key job. So for this purpose, the governor selected a former Enron executive. And as it happened the very next day, after he made the announcement, he got a $25,000 check from Ken Lay. And people with suspicious minds thought there might be a connection. So the governor was forced to hold a press conference in which he explained to everyone's satisfaction that it was totally coincidental. Good, we all said, totally coincidental, no problem there. And then we don't have a sunshine law in Texas. We have kind of like the partly cloudy law. But even under our law, if you make a major appointment like that, the appointee has to fill out a bunch of forms on his finances and past experience, and all that becomes part of public record. So a few days later, the governor's office had Xeroxed up this guy's forms and was passing them out there in the Capitol Press Room, where we, the alert guardian watchdogs of democracy, were hard at work. And we started going through these forms, and somebody said, "George, don't you think 17 looks funny?" George said, "I don't know, Sam, you think 17 looks?" And we all thought 17 looked funny. It turns out that the governor's office had whited out the answers to question 17 before releasing the forms. This was a very sophisticated cover-up. But we were on the trail right away, and in no time flat, discovered that 17 is the question, have you ever had any unfortunate involvement with law enforcement authorities? And turned out, well, there's a lady with water. Always good to have water. Turned out the guy had a couple of minor traffic violations, plus a couple of years earlier, he accidentally shot a whooping crane. And then he accidentally buried the whooping crane. And as a result, he had to pay a $15,000 fine under what we in Texas call the Endangered Species Act. Well, we put this in the paper, but you understand, you're looking at a whole state full of hunters, just like Louisiana, and a bunch of people saying, well, God damn, anybody could accidentally hit a whooper, No big deal there. But we stayed on the story and learned that he shot the whooper while on a duck hunt. Now, the whooper is a large bird there. Your whooper runs to 5 feet tall. The Now we got a whole state full of hunters saying, God damn, this sumbitch too dumb to tell a duck from a whooper. Can't have him running state utilities, and the man was forced to resign. Well, I think we need to move on here to our current situation with the presidential race. I accidentally became an authority on George W. Bush. Kind of like the guy who climbed Everest. It was there. I've known him since we were in high school. Never knew him well, but I've known him a long time, and I covered him for 6 years as governor of Texas, and think how amazed I was when he became president. There's a lot of ways to look at George W., and I look at him, and mostly what I see is Texas. There are three prominent strains of Texas culture, and you see them interwoven closely in Bush's personality. Unlike his daddy, who is, of course, a classic example of an upper-class elite Eastern WASP, W is culturally identified with the state of Texas very strongly. And the characteristics I see that strike me as so familiar are anti-intellectualism. That's very big in Texas. Religiosity, by which I mean not just belief, but the public display of belief, and machismo. And they're all attractive to fairly large swaths of voters. I do not think George W. Bush is dumb, and I do not think he is mean. I like him personally. I always have. He's just as affable as he can be. I think he's been a disaster as president, but you know, you don't have to hate someone to disagree with their policies. Grown-ups can make a distinction. You will see many talking heads on television who will confidently predict the outcome of this election. I am not one of them, and whenever you see one, you will know that you are looking at a blue-bellied nincompoop. One of the great secrets among political reporters is that most of us bet on political races. I make money betting on political races, and the reason I do is because I am much too smart to put any money down any closer than 6 weeks out from an election day. They have tried to program computers to predict the outcome of election races, and the poor little things just have nervous breakdowns. There are too many variables, you know, and we have, including the fact that either candidate could drop dead at any time. And consequently, I think anyone who does try and call a race this far out is a fool. My prediction is that it's going to be an event-driven race because it starts close, it will probably finish close, and what will affect it most is what happens between now and then. We already see some interesting patterns, I should just say, of the Democratic candidate John Kerry. It is, for those of us who are political reporters, this has already been a fabulous political year. I should explain that I have felt more excitement this year than I have for a long time, because for a reporter, for a real political wonk like myself, I keep thinking this is what it must have been like to be a political reporter in 1960, when you suddenly realize that the impact of another new communications technology is going to profoundly alter the entire political structure. And I think what has already happened this year is amazing and possibly more important than the outcome of this race. What we have seen for the first time is the effect of the internet on politics. And I must say that I am one who thinks that broadcast politics, having television be the major decisive factor in our political life, which has been true since the 1960 election, has been on the whole a negative thing for American politics. Of course, we do have a lot more people in office with good hair now. I think the impact of the internet is fascinating. You can see the professionals starting to take it in. The first question you will hear asked if you're a political reporter when someone announces for office is he serious or is she serious? And all that means is, do they have real money? And the fact that Howard Dean raised $43 million through the internet is enough to stop the entire professional political world in its tracks. It was fascinating to watch. The fact that Dean imploded seems to me, that's the way it goes. Nevertheless, I think the impact of that medium, which has the potential to bring people back into politics, is really exciting. The Democrat, of course, John Kerry, is a boring stiff. Well, he is. He may be a boring stiff with gravitas. He may be an intelligent boring stiff. He may even be a courageous boring stiff, but he's still a boring stiff. And so we have him against Bush, and it will be absolutely fascinating. One of the things we've never seen before is this amount of money on a political race. Bush will probably end up raising $200 million, and Kerry should raise well over $100 million. No one has ever seen that kind of money spent in a political race before, and the equally fantastic thing is that it's only going to be spent in about 15 to 19 states, the so-called swing states. Most of the people in this country are barely going to be where there's a political campaign going on. Those of you who live in swing states, like Louisiana, are going to be drowning in it. And what has happened since they've both already gone negative, and the negative issue ad people are out there, what happens, as you know, when two candidates just go at one another relentlessly, is that in the end, we wind up not wanting to vote for either one of them. And that, it seems to me, is one of the saddest things that has happened with broadcast politics. And I think perhaps this, with any luck at all, this could be the last run. Now, the reason, of course, people run negative ads is because they work. Campaign consultants have known that for a long time, and so has every demagogue who ever lived. You can win campaigns by appealing to people's prejudices and their fears. It works. But I remember one time interviewing an old boy out of West Texas. We were talking about the state of the world, and he said, I feel like I'm about equal parts good and bad. There's just nobody appealing to the good in me. And sometimes I think that if campaign consultants and politicians would figure out that you can also win by appealing to the good in people, we'd all be a lot better off, and we'd have a lot healthier politics. I want to say particularly to the students here tonight, I know that many of you are cynical about and disgusted with the American political system. And I am not about to tell you that that is a foolish attitude. There is much to be cynical about. There is much to be disgusted with. But this is a very brief civics lecture, and it really doesn't hurt at all. Just give me 3 minutes here. Politics is not something that you can look at as though it were a picture on a wall or a program on television and say, well, I just don't care for that. I hear people all the time say things like, I'm just not interested in politics. Oh, they're all crooks. Well, there's nothing I can do. We are collectively the heirs to the most magnificent political legacy any people has ever received. We believe these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We believe that governments are instituted among men to secure these rights, and that whenever any government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Those words are so profoundly revolutionary that more than 200 years later, they echo all over the world, and people are willing to give their lives for a chance to live under that system. People died for it in South Africa. They died for it at Tiananmen Square. They're dying for it today in Myanmar. And in Iraq, they're proving that they don't want it shoved down their throats. That legacy should not be thrown away out of boredom or cynicism or inanition. Politics is not about those people in Washington. It's not about those people up in Baton Rouge. It's our deal. We run this country. We are the board of directors. We own it. They're just the people we have hired to drive the bus for a while. Thank you. I told you it wouldn't hurt. Now, there's something else that I want to talk to the students about very especially and particularly. And I am just as serious as a stroke about this. I not only think you all should get involved, I think you can't avoid it. We live our lives surrounded by a nest of law and regulation. Every day, your life in dozens, if not hundreds of kinds of ways is touched by the political system. The qualifications of the people who prescribe your eyeglasses, whether or not the lady who dyes your hair knows what she's doing, how deep you will be buried when you die, the size of the cell should you be sentenced to Stripe City, the books your children will read in schools, all of those are consequences of the political decision. And you are the political system of this country. I want you to get involved, and I want to tell you, this is what I'm real serious about, that one main reason you should get involved in politics is because it's just a hell of a lot of fun. Now, I know that people get so serious anymore about politics, and I see them, people talk about politics and they get all red in the face and they tendons stand out in their necks and their wattles wobble like a turkey gobblers that get so angry. Good Lord, man, you're going to stroke out. Calm down. One of the major objects of being involved in politics is to laugh and have a good time. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. A few years back, the legislature over in Texas took a fit of communism and decided to recognize Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday as a holiday. Now, you'll be happy to know it was a package deal. We kept Confederate Heroes Day. Nevertheless, as you can imagine, it upset the Ku Klux Klan. And they announced that they were coming to Austin to have a big march and rally and protest about this. And of course, if you are a good civil libertarian, you naturally support the right of these blue-bellied nincompoops to stand up in public and spew whatever vicious drivel they want to, because it's in the damn First Amendment. And I am here to tell you that standing up for people like that will make you about as popular with your neighbors as a whore trying to get into the SMU School of Theology. So a group of us good libertarians were gathered over a pitcher of beer, quite mournfully, feeling sorry for ourselves. And of course it's nasty when the KKK comes. It upsets the black citizens. It upsets the Jewish citizens. The skinhead kids turn out to cheer for them. People get into fistfights on the sidewalk. Everybody's mad at everybody for 6 months. So we were sitting there in deep depression over the whole situation and came up with what we thought was a better plan. Now, we don't have enough truckers in Austin to have a good march. They had to be bussed in from Waco and Vidor. They got off the buses wearing their little pointy hats on their little pointy heads, commenced to march up Congress Avenue toward our state capitol. They were greeted by several thousand citizens of Austin who mooned them as they marched. It made a real nice effect. It was kind of like a wave baseball stadium. Really lovely. A man who taught me how to have fun while fighting for freedom was the late John Henry Falk. And when you went out with John Henry, freedom fighting, there's some Falk fans, it was always fun. One day, I was going to say hot summer day, but that would be so redundant. I got a call from the director of the Central Texas chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, which is not a powerful organization. She was in a state of high excitement and informed me that the Austin City Plan Commission was about to destroy the First Amendment. I said, damn. The First Amendment is under fairly steady fire where I come from, but I had not previously counted the Plan Commission among the forces of jackbooted fascism. Came as an unwelcome surprise. Well, the situation is that in Austin, Texas, we have a fundamentalist divine, the Reverend Mark Weaver by name. Weaver heads up an outfit called Citizens Against Pornography. They march around outside the dirty bookstores and movie theaters of our town with signs saying, honk if you hate pornography. I always honk. I do hate pornography, and besides, I feel they lend a certain je ne sais quoi to our municipal life. Weaver and his outfit had come up with a proposed new zoning ordinance under the provisions of which you could not have a dirty bookstore or movie theater within so many feet of a home or a school or a church, and the upshot would be to drive them all out of town to the cultural deprivation of the citizenry. Now, I genuinely hate pornography, but I did not think it was a good idea to have Reverend Weaver deciding what books we could read and what movies we could see. So I repaired that evening to the City Planning Commission, found there 350 citizens against pornography, and 4 of us from the Civil Liberties Union. Normal odds. And I am here to tell you there is nothing like sitting in the midst of a sea of citizens against pornography to make you notice that your friends look like perverts. Well, Weaver got up to speak first, very fine preacher of a certain old-fashioned style. Began by saying that very day, he had received a telephone call from a lady who lives behind the dirty movie theater on South Congress Avenue. I snapped to attention. It's my neighborhood dirty movie theater. In fact, driving in the meeting, I noticed a new feature attraction, the nun's bad habit. Yes, said Reverend Weaver, a lady who lives behind that theater, and after the 5 o'clock show on a previous day, a man came out of that theater. He went in the alley directly behind that theater, and the man there masturbated. And that lady has 2 little girls. 2 little girls might have seen that man do that terrible thing, except, praise Jesus, she has a large wooden fence around her backyard. Well, I'm telling you, with that, we all praise Jesus. And he was off and running and cussing sin up one side and down the other, and by the time he got through, it looked bad for the First Amendment. So we huddled and decided to send up our oldest member, John Henry, shuffled up to the microphone, doing his famous impersonation of an enfeebled senior citizen. Johnny was always very courtly and began by saying, members of the Planning Commission, Reverend Weaver, citizens against, ladies and gentlemen, my name is John Henry Falk. I was born and raised in South Austin, Texas, not a quarter of a mile from where the dirty movie theater stands today. I am now 75 years old, and I can tell you that there was a great deal of masturbation in South Austin before there was ever a dirty movie theater. One of my old heroes is the late Joe Rao, and he was a great hero during the McCarthy era back in the 50s. He defended all kinds of people who were blacklisted, and in the early days of the civil rights movement, he was there bailing people out of jail. He was a great freedom-fighting lawyer. Back in the days when it was certainly not clear that we were going to win that fight, he was there. Anyway, toward the end of his life, he got a big Lifetime Achievement Award from one of those do-gooder organizations. He was sick in hospital and couldn't go. Asked a friend to go down to Philadelphia to pick up the award for him. His friend went to see him in the hospital, and Joe was lying there just sick as a dog. His friend said, "What do you want me to tell him, Joe?" And Ralph said, his friend said, I was sitting there looking at him thinking, this guy's life was just, he could have been one of the most outstanding, well-known, wealthiest lawyers in New York. He could have been with any prestigious firm. He could have had an amazing career. He'd done corporate law, anything he wanted. And here he spent his whole life kind of bailing people out of jail for breaking bad laws. And Ralph looked up at him and said, "Tell him how much fun it was. Tell him how much fun we had." And I don't know about you all, but when I get on down toward the end of my road, that's what I want to be able to say to people like my nephew. I want to tell them how much fun I've had. Now, before I close, I plan to take questions, which I love to do. By the way, I want to say it's a real honor to be here on campus during Conservative Awareness Week. I thought I'd close with one last Texas story, and then we'll rip into the election and anything else y'all want to talk about. Politics, politicians. All the time, who is my favorite Texas legislator, and I never have been able to make up my mind. So many to choose from. Old Carl Parker always said, if you took all the fools out of the legislature, it would not be a representative body anymore. But you all are in luck. I'm having a Mike Martin day. I'm leaning Martin today. Old Mike Martin got elected to the House of Representatives over in Texas. He was an early harbinger of the moral majority. He ran on a platform of being pro-family and pro-American. It was pretty controversial, but he won anyway. He came down to Austin and turned out to be legislatively impaired. Basically, Mike was a hopeless dipshit that he could not get a single bill passed, not even memorial resolutions for people who had died in his district. So when he came up for re-election 2 years later, it was looking bad for Mike's chances. You know, hard to get re-elected if you have done zip during your time in office. And turned out that Mike had a lot more imagination than most of us had given him credit for. What he did was he hired his cousin Eddie and paid Eddie to shoot him in the arm with a shotgun, a touch I always liked. And then he claimed that it had been done by a satanic and communistic cult that was out to get him because he, Mike Martin, was so pro-family and pro-American. Well, let me tell you, this worked like a charm. There were headlines all over the state, legislator attacked by satanic cult. And I mean, it was just the biggest deal. We sent the Texas Rangers out to look for them. Now, I don't know about here in New Orleans, but over in Central Texas, your satanic communistic cults are in short supply. And nobody could come up with the perps on this one, but meanwhile, Mike's going around his district. He's got his arm all wrapped up in a red, white, and blue sling, and going around being pro-family and pro-American. I mean, it was a scene. And he was cruising toward re-election when, alas, as often happens in these plots, Cousin Eddie got drunk in a honky-tonk and spilled the beans. Now here is where we Texans can be proud. Not many state legislatures would have had the foresight to make it illegal to pay someone to shoot you. But in Texas, this is not legal. Do not come over and try and have that done. And with the news, poor old Mike became a wanted man, and I'm sorry to say that rather than facing up to his problems, old Mike just took it on the lam, went underground, went into hiding. We had to send the Texas Rangers after him. For 3 weeks, they hunted him high, they hunted him low. At last, they tracked him to earth. He was at his mama's house in Longview, hiding in the stereo cabinet. You know I'm not making this up. Of course, you're wondering what he was doing in the stereo cabinet. It is my belief that he always did want to be the speaker. All right, let's do questions. If you have a question, pop up and ask it to me, and then I'll repeat it in the mic so everyone can hear it. This guy is more upset about the performance of mainstream media than he is about the political situation, and he opines that if this bunch had been around in 1972, Richard Nixon would have gotten away with it, and wants to know if I think we will ever in our lifetimes see a vigilant media. I have a congenital flaw. I tend to be optimistic to the point of idiocy. And yes, I know exactly what you mean. The establishment media these days is supine. It always becomes, almost with every president, more and more courtier-like, as though they were, you know, at the court of Louis XIV, kissing the hand and then the feet of the great man. I mean, they went after Clinton like a pack of junkyard dogs. And you know, you sort of sit back and wait for them to see something. I guess they need easier stories is one problem. Let me tell you what I think is really going on, though. I've been in the news business since 1964. And I think that the concentration of ownership is finally starting to weigh on the quality of journalism. We always knew that it would, but I will tell you, in all the years I worked for newspapers, different kinds all over the country, I never saw it in the newsroom. Nobody ever called the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, which is owned by, as they all are now, by this mega giant thing, an infotainment corporation. The bean counters don't read the paper and go, "Oh, Molly Ivins can't say that about George Bush." What they do is they put their telescopes on their little property down in Fort Worth, and they say, "Aha, our little property in Fort Worth did not make as high a rate of return this quarter as our little property in Kansas City of an equal size. We must call them." And then the order comes down that, you guys got to make more money. There's pressure for increased profits every quarter. And what happens is there's only two ways to make more money on a newspaper if you, have got your market penetration and advertising cranked up as high as it'll go. You can cut news staff and you can cut news hole. And that's what's happening all over the country. Those of you who like to read good, funny books, Carl Hyacin, the wonderful writer out of Florida, wrote a book called Basket Case, which is as brilliant a description. And in case you're wondering, my old employer, Knight Ridder, is the chain in question, and that is a nasty portrait of Tony Knight in that book. I think, though, the reason I'm hopeful about this, we watch the concentration get worse and worse. I've never seen a public outcry like the one to the FCC when they moved to make the problem even more aggravated than it already is. 800,000 American citizens called, wrote, emailed, got in touch. No one had ever seen a reaction like that. Being unelected bureaucrats, the FCC went right ahead and further rolled back the rules against concentration of ownership. However, the politicians heard. And both houses responded instantly, but in their immemorial fashion, they didn't quite get their two proposals together, and so far nothing has happened. One of the key things, I know this system has been badly corrupted by money, but it does still respond if enough people stand up and scream. You can still make the whole system work if enough people stand up and scream. Politicians do listen. The trouble is you have to keep the pressure on, and that requires a lot of organization. I think what is happening that is completely different, and my great hope comes from this. It's a completely different kind of communication on the internet. With the New York Times, you have the Times up here, and it goes to reader, reader, reader. You have ABC or whatever here, and it goes to viewer, viewer, viewer. With the internet, information goes like that, instantly, all over the world, to everybody. The drawback, of course, is that there are no gatekeepers. There is nobody making sure that the information on the internet is accurate, factually accurate. And it pains me as a journalist to see some of the results, because I think that when you put bad information into the public debate, it's like poisoning the well of democracy. And I have hated editors all my life. I am obviously opposed to censorship of any kind. I suspect the internet is going to have to sort itself out on its own as far as its reliability at various sites. But I am very hopeful that that new technology is going to make a tremendous difference. And in the meantime, it's incredibly important to keep the small, independent voices alive. It really is. Her question is about an East Texas congressman named Charlie Wilson, since retired from office, and his role in Afghanistan. They're about to make a movie out of the book called Charlie Wilson's War. Charlie's going to be played by Tom Hanks. If I had opened the refrigerator door in my home yesterday morning and found Fidel Castro inside, I could not be more surprised. Charlie was known to us all, and I've known him for a good long time, as Good Time Charlie Wilson, an active alcoholic, and in many ways a great and patriotic American. The terrifying thing when you read that book is how foreign policy was hijacked by a single congressman from East Texas who, bless his heart, is a romantic guy. His role model in life is Flashman, for those of you who read the Flashman books, so you will have some idea of Charlie's fabulous swagger. And I mean, you know, he's the guy who's seen around Washington with a babe on both arms all the time. I mean, what a story, what a story. We always loved him because he was such a colorful character. But is this the man we want running foreign policy? It is a fascinating study of how literally billions of dollars were funneled into the Afghan Mujahideen, which later became the Taliban, which is now a bit of a thorn in our side, actually became Al-Qaeda. And we paid for the whole thing. What we got out of it was, according to this book, and of course it's a very specific point of view, was the collapse of the Soviet Union. The thesis is that when the incredible Afghani fighters defeated the mighty Soviet army, that was it. And it was shortly after that that the collapse came. It's a fascinating historical thesis. And the idea that Charlie Wilson was somehow responsible will remain forever. You know, I hate to criticize, but sometimes God is so heavy on the irony. And I point out, too, that the fact that Al-Qaeda appeared to come out of the same effort and that it strengthened the belief of the jihadists that if you could defeat a major Western army, is the kind of blowback that often comes out of secret policy and secret funding. Yeah. Joe Cook, Louisiana ACLU, bless their hearts, they do such amazing work. I don't think this audience really needs much instruction from me on the evils of the Patriot Act. Let me just point out that we are in a situation now where American citizens can be arrested by their government, held indefinitely, without access to a lawyer, without trial, and without knowing the charges against them. That is a state of abuse of civil liberty that has not been seen since the ancient regime in France with the lettre cachée. If you talk to lawyers who work in this area, this may interest some of you students, should you be quietly partying at a friend's place and there come a knock, knock, knock on the door and the police appear and say they want to enter and see if there are any minors in possession or persons smoking things of a non-tobacco nature, you say, of course, calmly, you cannot come in without a search warrant, and they say, oh yes, under the Patriot Act, we can. The Fourth Amendment has been damaged to the point of being crippled. This law is not being used to hunt down Arab terrorists in our midst. It's being used against Americans every day. Now, let me just say that I, of course, am a John Ashcroft fan. One of the reasons I believe that John Kerry has some chance to win this election, I have long known Karl Rove. I think he is one of the smartest people I've ever met, and certainly one of the smartest people about politics I've ever come across. But he is not infallible, and it was Rove who sent forth John Ashcroft on a charm offensive on behalf of the Patriot Act. I don't know about y'all, but charm is not the first word that comes to my mind when I see John Ashcroft. Basically, when I see John Ashcroft, I think sex. Well, the situation has driven the brother over here to a state of what we have to admit is paranoia. He wants to know if a prevailing political candidate under the Patriot Act and the current situation, if a prevailing presidential candidate could possibly be accused of being in league with terrorists and incarcerated and disappeared, not without a revolution in this country. It's a question about the Texas redistricting situation promulgated by Tom DeLay. You'll be happy to know that the investigation, grand jury investigation of the House Speaker I mentioned at the beginning of the speech also involves Tom DeLay and that entire arrangement. And let me just say, concerning the fact that the Texas legislature kept bolting the state, I was embedded with the troops in Ardmore, Oklahoma. And I would just think that you all should know that Ardmore is not a destination vacation spot. The question is, should Bush unhappily be reelected, or are we being driven towards some weird sort of capitalistic fascism? I have avoided the use of the F word over the years. I like to make fun of liberals who are always hearing the sound of jackbooted fascism. They're ever worried about it, and I think this is good. The eternal vigilance and so forth. Yeah, I think we're pretty close to the point of no return, but I don't think it's because, some evil plan by Bush or Rove or Cheney. I think it is the corruption of our political system by corporate money. And here I am, embarrassingly optimistic again. I think it can be fixed. I think the answer is public campaign financing. Look, we had public campaign financing at the presidential level for 4 cycles. After the scandals in 1972, we passed this law where you get down to the end of your IRS form, and there's a little box that says, check here if you want to kick in a couple of your tax dollars to keep the presidential campaign honest. It doesn't actually say that, but it should. And enough people could kick in so that for 4 cycles, which is a lifetime in politics, when people got elected president, they didn't owe anyone but the people. That's whose money they'd run on. Now, what happened, of course, in 1988 was the Supreme Court, in a moment of folly, decided a case called Buckley v. Vallejo, in which they held that money is the same thing as free speech. Actually, money is that green stuff you use to buy things with. Free speech is what comes out of your mouth, hopefully after your brain is in gear. They're not the same thing, and I do think that the Supremes, if they had a chance to revisit that, might rethink that position. The answer is public campaign financing at all levels, and every time it's on the ballot, people jump at it. Last time it was up, it passed in both Massachusetts and Arizona, 2 states that are not similar politically. In Massachusetts, the professional politicians are still fending it off, and in Arizona, it's been in effect for 2 rounds now. It's already having quite an effect there. And the trick with public campaign financing is where you set the bar. What they do in Arizona is you have to raise a certain sum. Say you're running for a state house race. You have to raise X amount in quantities of no more than $5 each from people who live in your district. People who know you, friends, neighbors, people who've worked with you and feel you're bright enough to represent them in the state legislature. If you meet that qualification, then you qualify for the pool of public money, and then you run your campaign with that. Now, the question is, if you set the bar too high, all you will ever get is the designated candidate of one of the major parties. If you set it too low, you will have every nincompoop in town running for office on the public nickel. So the more experience we have with it, the better we learn where to set the bar. And it does make a stunning difference because you don't have to be rich to run for public office in Arizona now. It's amazing what a difference that makes in their representation. the question is about education and equality, particularly equality of opportunity, as it turns out in reality, not theory, as in terms of public education in this country. As you know, how to fund the public schools is consistently a source of pain in almost every state in the country. And there are solutions. One is to consolidate school districts, which is always revoltingly politically unpopular because it provides employment, particularly in rural areas. They're often the major employers. And of course, when you're a principal of a small school, there you are with the same salary as somebody who's, got a huge inner city campus, and there's just all kinds of inequities involved in that. And then, of course, second, the rich property tax districts can tax themselves at lower rates than the poor districts and still wind up with much better schools. So the secret to equity is in the financing, and it is an area that is incredibly complicated. We have a theory that there are only 3 people alive in Texas who understand the formula we currently use. I'm not one of them. I think it's fairly obvious that you just have to go statewide in your funding. And I would like to see more federal money, the No Child Left Behind Act, one of Karl Rove's many little jokes. He has such a fondness for giving lovely names to revolting legislation. It seems to me that there are 2 problems with it. We basically in Texas, we've had No Child Left Behind, or a variation of it. With the federal bill was what we have with bells and whistles. And of course, there is no such, people talked about the Texas education miracle. There is no such thing. What has happened as a result of the enormous emphasis on testing, and we test at a very low level. I mean, you have to jump real high to pass those. Well, we knew it's unrealistic to set high standards to start with. It's simply unrealistic. Is that our dropout rates have gone up enormously. And the trick they use is the kids get tested now in 10th grade. So we have whole schools that are peopled by technical 9th graders. And after 3 years as 9th graders, they get their diplomas. It's really a shocking mess. And I would say it's like several ideas I've seen of Bush's. Bush does not like detail. He is not interested in policy. And the problem is that even if his ideas are good, and some of them are, for example, he was a great proponent of chartered schools in Texas. Because he doesn't pay attention to detail, because he really has no respect for government, and I say this blanket, most right-wing Republicans don't like government, they don't respect what it does, and so they don't pay much attention. They don't write law very well. And the result is that it gets screwed up in the way it's carried out. That was the trouble with charter schools. Here we passed all this money for charter schools. Well, we didn't want a lot of regulations. The whole point was no more government regulations. Less regulation is better. The result was a bunch of crooks qualified for the money, people who didn't even have college degrees qualified for the money, damn fools who spent it all on the building, couldn't even open the schools because they couldn't pay the teachers. I mean, it was the biggest mess you ever saw. And I see that again and again. You see it, I think, in the Medicare prescription bill. That has to be the worst written piece of legislation I have ever looked at. Maybe this is too inside journalism, but let me take a crack at it. It's about the utility of objectivity. Look, people inside the business and anybody who's thought about it for more than a nanosecond realize that there is no such thing as objectivity. We all see the world from where we stand. And to pretend that there is has been the fatal flaw of establishment media in this country. I'm 65 years old, I'm white, I have a college degree, I'm a woman. All of that affects how I see the world. There is no way in hell, with the best will of the world, I am not going to see things the same way an 80-year-old retired Polish plumber does, the same way a 15-year-old black bitter dropout does. We all see the world from where we stand. Okay, there's no such thing as objectivity, but should it be a desirable goal? To the extent that, you know, I'm like all other journalists. I work on factual accuracy, and I must tell you that error creeps into my column even after all these years, despite my best effort. But I find that there is an almost ludicrous, again, I think we would be better off if we admitted that there was no such thing as objectivity. That I think fairness is a much better standard, and of course that too is very much in the eye of the beholder. But I think it's the falseness of the claim to objectivity that people see through so easily. For those who didn't hear it, if I had 5 minutes with John Kerry, what would I tell him? Why do you think I've been trying to get Bob Shrub on the phone? Hire the man a voice coach. Get him a speech coach. How can they hear? He have been in politics this long and still talking that monotone and the one gesture, no matter what he's talking about, you get the one gesture. Oh my God. Second of all, I think that he should ask more of people and think bigger. I know that on issues, most Americans, on many issues, tend to prefer Democrats to Republicans, and in fact, Kerry has a very strong health plan. Of all the Democratic candidates, I think his was probably both the most well thought out and the most politically doable. But there are many things that should be strong points for him, but there is no, like Poppy Bush, no vision thing. I think a lot of people say this is going to be a referendum on Bush, and all Kerry has to do is keep breathing until November. Not managing much more than that, is he? I don't think that's true. I think you really have to give people a reason to vote for you. And even if it's, you remember when Bush started last in 2000 ran, he would close every speech by saying, I'm going to restore trust and honor to the White House. I think Kerry should say, I am running to restore trust and credibility. What she said is, speaking of dramatic disconnects, what do I think between the gulf between Democrats and Republicans? You know, there's lots of blame to go around for the decline of civil political discourse. But I think there are a couple of things that have aggravated it. Again, redistricting has made districts more cohesive. There's a new and rather alarming survey out county by county that shows that we are now more segregated by political opinion than any other factor. And, you know, I have always had a lot of Republican friends, but I think that's because I work in politics. And it used to be that politicians really did, you know, fight on the floor all day and then go out and get drunk together at night. And were among themselves far more civil and friendly than, you know, angry ideologues out in the citizenry. I think there is plenty of blame to go around for the decline and some technical reasons for it, like redistricting. But I really think that the rise of the organized right wing, which, you know, goes back 30 years, there's no vast right wing conspiracy. This has all been out there in plain sight for years. Funded by people like Richard Mellon Scaife and Joe Coors and a whole bunch of big money people. And they sort of built up their think tanks and built up alternative publications, alternative academic publications, alternative mass publications, and they have influenced the course of political debate in this country. That's fine, they're free to do that. Where it gets nasty, I think, is at two levels, and there would be two people I would point out in particular. One is Rush Limbaugh, who would be largely amusing, except I think he misuses satire. And I speak as somebody who works with political humor, and I know that it can be very cruel. Satire is traditionally the weapon of powerless people used against powerful people. And it can be cruel. It literally is holding people up to scorn and ridicule. When you aim satire at powerless people, it is both cruel and profoundly vulgar. And think there is a kind of brutalizing of sensitivity in this country. I mean, you want to go after Bill Clinton, fine. He's the President of the United States. He can take care of himself. But making fun of homeless people is not funny. The second person I think deserves considerable blame is Newt Gingrich. I go back to a memo sent out by GOPAC, his political action committee, in 1994 to every Republican candidate running for Congress that year. It recommended that you use 10 words concerning your Democratic opponent, no matter who he or she was. I'm sorry I can't say them all, but I know at least 6 of them: bizarre, sick, pathetic, twisted, and traitor. That kind of language used as a matter of course is numbing and debases the entire process. I thank you so much for listening to me. I can't tell you what fun this has been. Thank you. Thank you.